Okay, so I've got a Rapidstrike here. Just got it fairly cheaply, decent price. Cool with the white stripe. Might minimize it or something. Oh, look what we've got here. Looks like we've got another Rapidstrike. So I got two. What should I do with these? Hang on a second. Okay. Okay then. Well, I guess I got some work to do. First, make sure to remove your battery tray. Next, remove the screws. Next up is opening it up. Now when you open it up, there is going to be a little string holding it in. Very simply, all it is just the lead. It's a battery lead. Oh, can't see. It's a battery lead right in the corner right here. So this battery lead is just the same thing on the other side. So all you have to do is just gently tug. So here, there's this orange little piece that holds it, and all you gotta do is just pull out like this, but on the other side. Okay, the smart thing to do is actually to just take a needle nose plier, grab the spring, and then pull out. So all you got to do is hold this piece. This part is going to hold and then out. And you can continue using C batteries like usual. If not, if you're planning to minimize it, then yes, you could technically just cut it out. So I have just removed some parts. Careful, there's a pin in the stock that I would like to remove just for visual purposes. It doesn't really do anything. I think it just helps with positioning inside the stock area of the Rapidstrike. But just very simply slides back out if needed. So next, you take out these two screws and these four, and this plate is not actually held into the shell in any way else than when you put it together. So there's a few like holes here. Those are meant for posts on the other side of the shell, which I'm going to try and demonstrate later on. You're just going to take your barrel, put that to the side. You can start taking bits and pieces out like this, this wire kind of holder. Again, two screws, put that to the side. You can actually, this whole system, nothing is really attached, like glued in, so you really can just take everything out. And there's also going to be, in order to pull the whole system out, you're going to need to pull on your switch plate. Oh, you can't see. Whoops. You're going to pull on your switch plate and remove this as well. So now you basically have your entire Rapidstrike shell is completely empty. Keep in mind there's a little nut. And now I'm going to go over the screws. This long screw goes up here. Sometimes it's a little stripped, especially if you get like used stuff, sometimes it's stripped, so be careful with taking that out. You might need a bigger screwdriver than usual to take that apart. So you have the 5 tinier screws, the one really long one, and the rest so far is the exact same. Now I just popped this piece out, and it's the same on both sides of the shell. So this used to go like this. That's your old Rapidstrike. I snapped it out. So all I did really is just kind of, you don't want to really force it, but you kind of have to at the same time. Just like that. Like you just tug on it, and once one comes out, the rest really do. There's a bit of a stress mark, but this is not meant to be removable in any way. So just like, you know, if you want to do it for painting purposes, that's fine, but you know, don't repeatedly change. So these are the internals of your Rapidstrike. About half of these boards, like these green boards here, this one here, you don't need. If you're not planning on soldering anything, you should not be watching this, because you will need to solder from now on. Now, looking over, there are 2 screws again. One behind these wires, one here. Let's open this thing up. To remove all of this, you gotta remove this kind of piece there. There's a bit of glue there, and remove, that's one switch down. So that's one of your switches, that's one of the points, and please do keep this, this piece, you do need it. Take a screwdriver and pry that apart, and bam, your Rapidstrike plate is apart. So a few things are going to come out. This piece you don't need. This is technically garbage. Definitely want to remove this piece. This is also part of the clip lock. Now, this is the rev trigger. You do need this. This is your trigger. Again, you definitely need this. So basically, as a cost-saving measure, you already have 2 switches here. So you could technically wire this as just a 2-switch setup, which is basically you pull the trigger and you pull the rev switch, and then you shoot with the normal trigger switch, I guess. However, you will need a 3rd switch for a 3-switch setup, and you don't have actually a 3rd one. These two, this was once the 3rd switch setup, and this used to be the 2nd switch. However, because they are on all these wires, I don't know how this works, so I usually just remove it, and you usually get a lot of spares. Whenever you modify a Strife, they've got tons of these in it. First thing you want to do, so you just take this and you can just remove all the wires, and then take this off. So you've got your 2 switches. You need this. All of these are needed, well, except for this one. You need another switch as well. You could save this, or you can just clip it off. I'm choosing to clip it off because you will need these to wire up your Rapidstrike. I've got my wire cutters. You're going to remove it off of this motor. This thing is free. Your pusher is basically free. That is your Rapidstrike pusher. You can remove this plate by using a soldering iron, which I will demonstrate how to do later on. Now next, you have the rest of this mess. So this was holding this kind of flappy thing from the darts. Basically, it was a dart guide, but I personally just remove it just due to jams. You got to be careful because you want to keep these, but you don't need the rest of this. So this piece is basically trash. Okay, so once your soldering iron is heated up, you're going to want to have in your dominant arm a soldering iron, and your non-dominant arm you probably want to have something like needle nose pliers or something. But you probably should take this little orange peg right off. Let me just snap this. You're going to be very careful. You don't want to rip the leads off of it. You also want to have at least like a wet sponge or something nearby when you're soldering, just so that you've got something you can wipe the solder with. There is your circuit board that you can throw out. So now you're going to need some wire. Now the wire is going to get hot when you solder it, and you want to connect like lead to lead, lead to lead. And that should be solid, okay? Now the other side is a bit easier, so you just again, you can just bend that thing around. Soldering joint. Just cut the end. So see, this is another mistake I always make. Right there, see how the wire is really long? You don't want that to be too long because you might short circuit it. So you probably want to cut it down to about half of that. It's always good to have extra, just in case, things go south. Okay, so that's one side, and you just rinse and repeat on the second. Okay, so the 2 sides are done. Now, an easy way to determine which side's positive and negative is to just grab, a 9-volt, or get a battery pack, or if you don't have that, you can always use the Rapidstrike's battery pack, which just has the 2 leads, and you could just put, 4 in here. You don't want to run it too long because you don't want to burn your motors. To do this, you know which wire. Okay, this is negative, and this end is the same, so I usually clip it here, just because one side's going to be a spring, and there you go. And then you just look at the way the motors are spinning, and right now it looks like it's in the opposite direction. So this is the negative lead, obviously, on the battery pack. This is the positive. So black is positive, this is negative here on the white. So now my usual, what I do, just put that in kind of halfway, and notice how the dart is actually moving in ever so slightly, which means this is the opposite direction. So you can now do one of two things. You can either switch it on here, or you switch it here. I personally think switching it here is easier. So once you do that, this dart should more easily flow outwards. So there you go. So because the motors, I mean, obviously that was a very weak thing, but that was enough to determine, okay, this is the right direction. So now we know that the right side here is negative and the left side is positive. So what I usually do again is to put so this is negative, so I usually put like a little symbol here. You're not going to be seeing this, so it doesn't really matter. It's on the inside, so just as a notation. But yeah, so those are your motors. Now, time to work on this thing. So once you have removed all of the screws, there's going to be 2 clips on each side, and you just want to gently and carefully pry that apart. So that's basically your Rapidstrike pusher motor. So let's just set this to the side, and let's just mess with this motor. Very similar to the motor, like these. Very similar. You just grab any solder you can off of it, pry off anything in the middle. There. So that's a clean motor, no kind of board. You could throw that out as well. And now for reinstalling it into the pusher. So when you're reinstalling this thing, you got to be very careful. You got to put this thing in first. Then you got to put this thing in with the worm gear. This is the pusher, and the pusher, a lot of grease on it. You don't want to mess with it. So there's going to be a little peg. That peg goes into this hole right here. So you just want to carefully place it on, and everything should snap back together. There you go. So the thing is together, and your clips should clip on, and you screw it back together, and you're basically done with this pusher motor. You don't need to open this up anymore, so feel free to close it and never look at it again. But you are going to need to access these leads later on when you wire up your Rapidstrike. Now, when you use your switches, there's 3 different types of switches. Not sure if you're able to see. The lighting is not very good in here. But the 3 switches, this is the one that comes in the Rapidstrike. This comes with most other blasters, and this one comes with like stripes and stuff. You don't want to be using the stripe one unless you are planning to put it in as a lock remover, right? Because it doesn't really quite fit in as nicely. And these are what they came with. They're the same size, these 2. So that's why I recommend try using these as much as you can. You do have 2 enough for a 2-switch setup, but if you do have another one, use this one again with that. Okay, so now you have done that, you will now move on to the switch plate. So the switch plate, the switches are a little wobbly. The only one that I would like, this one, for the rev switch, that one you can keep in and you don't need to do anything, but for the rest I would suggest making some modifications. You've got yourself another one, these, and I mean that's just not even feasible. Like that's gonna move around, and you don't want that. You want these to be stuck in there so that when the button is being, the switch is being pressed, it's actually being pressed. Since you're only gonna have 2 white ones and one one black one. I would recommend basically putting the black one on the trigger, because that one is you're gonna push for sure. And I've had problems with the red trigger not being pulled properly, and I've had problems with the 3-switch trigger here, but I've never had problems with the red trigger not being able to pull. So I always recommend putting a black switch here, a white one back here, which you don't need to glue in. I've already glued this one in, and I'm going to show you how to glue it in into this one, because it's basically the same thing. So all you got to do, you just grab some tape. I usually just use painter's tape. It doesn't really need to matter. It's just used because the way these switches are made, they always have this little gap here, and that is like a spring. I'm not sure if my camera is going to focus. There you go. And the spring right there, you want to make sure that spring is not being interfered by your glue. So what I'd recommend is also make sure you have your hot glue gun, fired up, and just put that thing around there just to protect it from the glue. And it doesn't need to be super good. Now, I don't recommend putting it directly on, but I do recommend putting it in the plastic, just because it just does a better job. And you're just gonna wanna put that in there. Okay, so sorry that my video cut off. Your switches, they don't need to be put in completely, like they don't have to be glued in, but these are just kind of creating kind of a closer mold for your switch. Okay, so now that pieces are sort of going back together, you can now put things back in. You could put lubricant, which I'm planning on doing. Again, materials in the description. I usually use something like this Super Lube, which is pretty good, and you don't need to apply too much. And I've had this for like 2 or 3 years. Like, this is not too expensive, and you don't need to put too much. Just kind of, put it on kind of the little bits and pieces that are going to have contact, just to make it a little smoother when you are firing it. I mentioned that you don't need to modify this, but there is technically a trigger lock integrated into this, and one way you can fix it is to not cut the entire thing off, but rather just a little bit of it. So I usually just come up into here and I just clip off a little bit off the top, and there goes that piece. Next, the rev switch. Next is the actual trigger. And then you have your third one, which is the third kind of step. Now this one goes in like so, and again, you want to put lubricant on this because this thing is going to be moving a lot. So this one you might want to put a little more than usual. That's definitely what I'm going to be doing. So again, you just apply some to high friction areas, such as this here and in here. So that is your switch plate. Now, at this point, you're kind of done with this, so you could kind of put this thing back together. So you just put this around, and at this point, it's probably important for you to know that we are not actually going to open this thing up anymore. This is going to be stuck because now we're going to get to the wiring point. I'm going to screw this thing back together. Again, your 2 screws that you initially had. So your switch plate is complete. You can, test, make sure things are working properly. Okay, so once you've wired everything up, the wiring diagram is going to be in the description. So these are the 2 battery leads. There will be, I'm using Captain Xavier's tactic of wiring up your Rapidstrike. I used basically all stock wires that came with the blaster inside. I just cut them off of these boards and stuff and used them. So another little tip, so you're gonna have a few extras, which is fine. I did use one of my own personal wires, which is this green one here. Not sure if you're able to see, but that's the only one. And you could technically splice up this red one, solder it to this black one, or black on black, or whatever, and then just put it together. So you could get away with that. But yeah, so the wiring diagram, again, will be in the description. Now, for the gem door, I usually like to put a lock in here, just because, well, it's not a lock, but just to hold it in place, or else this thing is going to slide around like crazy. But make sure you have your barrel. You've got this piece here. You've got this piece. It does go back in here. Oh, you just got your magazine release. So you also have your little rail pieces, which are right over here. And this one goes like this. And then you could put this piece in. Make sure you put your rails back in. Okay, so this is it. This is the end of the Rapidstrike build. Right down here in the bottom right is basically parts you don't want. So things like little locks, plastic locks, boards off of motors, resistance, broken switches with boards on them. These ones you don't really want. And here are parts that you could keep for spares, things like other wires, springs, another screw in case you might want to keep that for something else. You can always use it, because sometimes screws get stripped, so it's nice to have extras. Over here, let me see, yeah, you're able to see it. So this is just basically, these are the 5 screws. 3 for the top of the shell, again, 2 here, and then there's one really long one that goes here. So when you're putting it back together, after you've wired everything up, what I would recommend is that this pusher, solder it, and then put this in before you put in the switch, because it gets difficult to put the screws back in to put it in. And then you've got to put your stock. Make sure you don't forget this pin right at the edge, and make sure you put that in. Put your jam door, your little sights, tactical rail bits. This part is kind of going to be a bit challenging to kind of put this back into the other side of the shell. Make sure you put, your sight, and then you're going to have 4 screws that are going to be similar size to the medium-sized screw here, goes here, and then 2 small screws and 3 small screws here. No screws hold in the switch plate except for the actual shell. These pegs here will actually correspond with these 3 pegs here, which will actually shut it. So don't put a screw there, or else your Rapidstrike's not going to shut properly. Now, tell you how to put it back together. You're going to need to fit the higher part here into this bit. So it's going to be a little bit challenging to show this on camera. What I would recommend is that when you snap this off, if you do, snap this off and put this onto this. So that way that you don't need to worry about it. You can just have, so for example here, using this, there's usually supposed to be these 2 things. They're supposed to sit right into here. You can just literally just leave that in there and solder them and whatever, because you don't really need to modify any bit of this front piece. So once you do that, you will be good to go, and that's about it. But now, since I didn't do that, I'm going to need to put this in manually, which shouldn't be too difficult. You kind of just need to wiggle it through, and it's very difficult because I chose to use the shortest wire known to mankind. Okay, I think I got it in, and once you have it in, you kind of just have to hold it into place. Everything just kind of shifts into place. And I think we have ourselves a functioning Rapidstrike. So I'm going to screw this thing back together, show you it firing with normal D batteries and upgraded batteries, and we'll see how it does. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below what you think about this tutorial. Thanks for watching.